This is The Hypothesis, the show where industry experts debate and discuss growth marketing approaches, digital advertising tactics, measurement plans, as well as creative and growth strategies.
Hi, I'm Phil Ware, VP of Strategy at Thrive Digital.
And I'm Eric Sloan, VP of Data and Strategy at Thrive Digital.
And I'm your moderator, lay marketer, and asker of clarifying questions, Santana Blanchett. Hi, friends. Welcome back. I can't believe we are on episode 4 already. Today, we are going to do our best to avoid all of the baseball metaphors because we are talking about big swings in advertising. So I'm going to start off by asking kind of an introductory question, which is, what is a big swing in advertising? And can you contrast it with a little swing for some context?
I'll try and avoid dad jokes today, I promise.
Not all.
Bring them out, Phil.
Oh, I can try my best. The way I define a big swing is really something where you're not just trying to like squeeze a bit more from an existing tactic or make like a small incremental gain in performance. You're trying something net new that's going to change the paid program. You're trying something new that's going to either change the way you look at your overall paid program, be that metrics, be that ways of measuring, or you're trying a net new channel or something really big in terms of product and how you're trying to put that to market. So it's really thinking bigger than, let's say, a little swing like an ad copy test, a landing page test, adding a new keyword to a campaign, adding a new audience to a meta prospecting campaign, etc. There's a very big difference there, I think, in terms of the scale of the impact you're trying to make with a big swing and a little swing. Some of the other differences I'd say, like big swing, higher risk, higher reward, and lower risk, lower reward for little swings, I would say. But the big call out I would share immediately is that like one can't exist without the other. And you need to have a duality going on there of really trying to, yes, optimize using the little swings, but also be focusing on the big swings to try and make those bigger step changes in the overall program. That was a long-winded answer, but essentially big swings, big results, hopefully. Little swings, the smaller incremental optimizations that should be going on all the time in a paid program.
I have a question. Is a big swing always a test? Because I sort of see it as like, I suppose, to use a baseball analogy, you're stepping up, you're swinging for the fences, right? What that kind of means is that it might not work.
Yeah.
And so, are all big swings tests? I would think so. Like, I mean, if it's guaranteed to work, or if it's just sort of, having a small incremental change, I would say that doesn't fall into the category of big swing. Whereas like a little swing is like those little kind of incremental improvements that you make. Mm-hmm. Whether that be ad copy or whether that be like small creative changes or whether it be like small tactical tweaks to your campaigns, those types of things, those are all little swings. Whereas a big swing is something that you just don't know if it's going to work or not.
But then isn't that the essence of a test, Eric? Like you don't know if it's going to work. And if you go into a big swing without thinking it's a test, I think that's dangerous. And the reason I say that is because you're going into it not necessarily thinking of, well, how am I going to measure this outcome? How am I going to try and validate if this has been a success or not? And if we did swing for the fences, did it reach the fence or not?
Right.
If you don't necessarily think of it in that way and you're just saying like, this is something cool we could try, but you haven't thought through the like parameters of how you're going to actually push that into market and how you're going to validate the success or not, is it something that your C-suite is going to be able to get behind if you're not right. going in with that like clear understanding of what that big swing is?
I guess I bring that up because I've been scarred so many times in my career from executives who don't understand marketing, sort of saying, "Hey, we want to try this new channel, or we want to run this test, but we want to know that it's going to work before we jump into it," right? And that happens quite often.
Right.
And I think that's what I'm talking about when, we are trying these things that have the potential to have some kind of meaningful change.
Yeah.
They might not work, right? And that's where that larger risk comes from. Mm-hmm. The second point that I would say, I think with big swings is that it needs to be able to have a meaningful change on your marketing program. And I say marketing program instead of media program because it doesn't necessarily have to just change how you're doing digital advertising or advertising in general, but having some kind of meaningful change on your marketing program. Or I would say the other piece to that could be that you have some kind of meaningful change to how you understand your market. So do you understand your customers better? Do you understand how to communicate to your customers better? Are you changing the ways that you're reaching them across the funnel or across the customer journey? All of those things, I think, need to be an outcome of a big swing.
Yeah.
One example that I think of is like running PMax, right? So like an e-commerce brand that is already running shopping and already running search, turning on PMax is not a big swing, right? It's just sort of a different way to serve the same inventory. Mm-hmm. That's not a big swing to me. Whereas, having some kind of fundamental change to your program or your understanding of the market, I think is really meant to be the outcome.
Yeah.
So would it be fair to put it in layman's terms then and say like a big swing could be classified as something net new, so a new channel, a new channel, a new content type, like a new delivery mechanism, and a little swing would be a tweak to something that you're already doing? Like, would that be fair to simplify it that way?
I would say that it doesn't necessarily have to be net new. So, and it's going to change based off of the organization. So a large organization is going to have a different definition of a big swing than a smaller organization. I would say that some organizations, they're investing millions and millions and millions of dollars into, say, Google search, and that's like their primary digital advertising channel. Just making some changes to that program, that could be a big swing, right? So like reducing your search advertising budget by 50% and pushing it into some other channel, whether that be social or programmatic, those types of things, that could be a big swing too, right? And that's not necessarily net new. You're just shifting that media mix, right? So like if you're changing your media mix in some significant way, that could also be a big swing.
Yeah, there's so many nuances to it, right? Like, it all depends on the size of the business too. Because if you look at a business spending $50,000 a month on, Meta ads, let's say, a big swing could be, let's start testing UGC. Like, that could be a big swing for that brand in particular, because it's something net new that is reaching the customers in a different way and might resonate differently. But for a bigger brand who's already got a big swath of creative, a big swing might be like, let's stop looking at in-platform ROAS and optimize towards business outcomes or incrementality, or change to an incremental ROAS model for all of our channels. That could be a big swing. And that fundamentally changes how the program's being looked at and the impact it could have on the overall business. So, I think the definition almost changes from brand to brand and the size of brands, I would say. So it's tricky to like nail down, I think.
That's why I come back to, like, it has to have some meaningful change on your program,
yeah,
or on your understanding of your market, right? And for a small business, that could mean a very different thing than a really large established business.
Yeah, and another kind of thought I throw out there that may be provocative is
provoke away.
I'm going to provoke away. Is it more risky to not be testing big swings than to actually be testing big swings?
So you stole my next question, which is I was going to ask, why would a brand take a big swing? Like, why do big swings if there is the risk of not having those results?
I mean, the perspective I'd have on that is essentially that if you are just making tweaks to what you've already been doing and trying to squeeze out, an additional little 10% increase in conversion rate, etc., like, great, those should be going on anyway, but all the other brands are doing that too in the market. So if you want to be getting ahead of what is a very quickly evolving marketplace and industry, those big swings are almost the ways in which you can leapfrog some of the competition, who are constantly evolving, and leapfrog some of what's going on in the industry. So there's a clear kind of benefit to doing so. Are there challenges to going and like pushing that into reality and like being comfortable with the uncomfortable factor of some of those bigger tests? That can be very challenging. So yeah, I would kind of wrap things up in that way. Eric, I don't know if you've got a different opinion.
Not necessarily a different opinion, but in addition there, I would say that they're also way easier to understand and to measure. So if you try something that's meaningfully different, let's say, you take a chunk of your media mix, 20%, let's say, and you push it into a new channel, or you fundamentally change how you're going to communicate to people in the consideration bucket of your marketing funnel. So, something large like that, you're going to learn so much more quickly, because the results should be more obvious, right? If you're making a fundamental change, you're going to see those results really quickly. You're going to learn more about your customer. You're going to have the potential to have a meaningful shift. So when you're looking at your year-over-year comps, you're actually seeing a meaningful shift in revenue or lead generation or pipeline generation, something along those lines. Versus the smaller incremental changes. If you're pushing out 1% to 5% incremental changes, they don't add up like you think that they will. The sort of famous adage is like, if you get 21% lifts, then you get a 50% lift, right? That's on aggregate. That's how it works out. It doesn't actually add up that way. Typically, things regress towards the mean, and those little incremental shifts are not going to add up over time, whereas those big shifts are easy to measure, and they actually tend to drive more business results in the long run.
Interesting. So essentially, big swings are easier to measure. Little swings are harder to surmise as having results.
Yeah, and even especially now, I would say, with how things are changing in our industry from a privacy standpoint, being able to measure those small incremental changes with precision is getting harder and harder and harder. And so really taking those bigger swings and being able to, fundamentally change a communication strategy, or, the type of landing page that you're sending traffic to, or, your media mix in some way, making those big changes, it's just going to be easier to measure, and you're going to have much more confidence in the results.
What is preventing marketers from taking those big swings now?
Incentives.
Yeah, I think that there's a very clear example in my mind that pops up here, and it's how marketing teams are measured by the organization they are working for. Similar to incentives, as Eric just mentioned, where if you've got an organization who is tying that marketing team to a very clear ROAS that is measured via in-platform measurement, let's say, and there is no wiggle room to test or experiment, there's no experimental budget, you're really tight on those ROAS targets as it is, there is no incentive to experiment because it is too risky, and your finance team, let's say, will be locking you into a very clear way of looking at the business and looking at the marketing program. So marketing teams are not incentivized to look at things differently, because they are kind of locked into that view of the world. So where things get challenging with these bigger swing tests is that they're generally challenging that status quo, and it's not just a simple we'll turn this on next week. You need to get buy-in throughout the whole organization, be that finance, the C-suite, commercial teams, whatever it may be, to try and turn that test into reality, because it has impacts beyond just the marketing program. It has impacts to how the marketing program is even being looked at by the organization as a whole. So that's been one of the biggest things that I've seen, is there's almost a disincentive to rock the boat and really move beyond what's been done before. So that's one of the biggest things I've seen.
You mentioned risk, right? I think that it's more risky to not be regularly taking big swings.
Yeah.
And the reason is you're basically opening up your entire business model to disruption. We live in an era over the last couple of years of business at AI speed, right? And that's going to be very disruptive to marketing teams and organizations in general that are not willing to take any type of risk, or are not willing to at least test big ideas, right? And I think that the testing of those big ideas is how you move forward, is how you make sure that you're creating a moat for yourself in order to avoid being disrupted by, an up and comer organization, right? And so I would actually say that it's more risky to not be doing big swings, to not be testing those ideas, to not be, pushing the boundaries of what your marketing team can do, than it is to actually just stick with the status quo.
I couldn't agree more. And I mentioned that in the first section, like the risk of not doing these things, I think, is greater than actually doing them. Now I could caveat that with like, you need to be doing it in the right way and that you shouldn't just be having a check written for $1 million and like, hey, go spend this somewhere and see what happens. Like, no, like there needs to be a clear plan in place for that. But yeah, I couldn't agree more, Eric. I think like the brands that are going to, win in this era of change are going to be the ones who are testing some of these bigger swings and adopting some new technologies or even like new ways of looking at their businesses, especially in this era of like massive measurement change. Those are going to be the ones who can kind of stand the test of time and weather any rocky waters better than brands who are not open to that change or open to experimentation in that space.
Absolutely. And I would say I also just have a quick point on the budget piece, because I would agree with you that, sometimes it can seem expensive to do testing or, there's some kind of opportunity cost. For example, if we're running an incrementality test or something like that, you may have to turn off advertising in a certain portion of the country. Those types of tests are seen as high risk as well, because, you may be leaving money on the table and those types of things. But I would say that the vast majority of the organizations that I have seen in my career are probably over-investing in at least one channel from an advertising perspective, right? Typically it's search. Oftentimes there is a desire to push more money into search because it's so easy to measure and it's so fast to see results and those types of things, that you get to this point where you reach a point of diminishing returns. And just by pulling back on some of those campaigns, oftentimes you can free up enough budget to do some testing and to understand your marketing program better, or the market itself. So I think that there are those opportunities to find budget if marketing teams are willing to be a bit creative within that. But I understand that is definitely perceived as higher risk.
Yeah. So I guess there's a question on that then. Like an interesting test, as you said, might be, let's pause advertising on a specific channel in X area of the US. And that has inherent risk. Like there could be revenue reductions as a result. I might not hit my quota. I might not get my bonus. Like that mindset becomes a part of that marketing team. So are there alternatives to something like that, Eric, where instead of cutting spend, you double spend and think about, well, what's the impact going to be of that? Are there, I guess, alternatives to try and de-risk such an experiment where you are cutting off marketing spend?
I mean, yes and no, but doubling spend means that you're testing doubling spend, not what your existing spend is doing in terms of work. I really don't think there's a good way of de-risking that completely, right? I mean, at a certain point, you just need to find out, what your dollars are actually doing for the business.
Yeah, interesting.
I wonder, it's like investing, right? Like you are rewarded for higher risk with a potentially higher reward, but the risk has to be appropriately high to merit that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what's the risk of putting all of those dollars into a channel every single year, and it's actually not providing the return that you think it is, right? I think that risk is even higher than, let's say, turning off that channel in 25% of the country or something to understand the incremental impact. So
totally.
Everything comes with a certain amount of risk. It's risky to do advertising in the first place. It's risky to make assumptions around what type of advertising channels are going to produce a return and all of these things. Right. You have to just approach it from the perspective of, hey, I want to understand what my investments are doing for the business. And so we're going to systematically, better understand our assumptions about the marketing program and update those assumptions through rigorous testing. And I think that, yes, you can potentially de-risk missing a bonus by, testing, doubling the spend or something like that. But if you double spend and you find out that there was no impact from doubling that spend, I would say that that's a large risk as well.
Yeah.
And potentially more disastrous to the marketing program.
it's so interesting. Like it brings up, a broader topic around like how I suppose like corporations are set up on a quarterly basis to hit those numbers and are like short-sighted in doing so. And I know that's a massive topic. But I think the other one that pops up to me is, what's the LTV of that test? Or like, what is that value that test could have over the course of the next 2 years? As you said, Eric, like if this could fundamentally change reducing X amount of marketing budget in a channel, that could have really long-term impacts and like save a lot of money potentially that could be invested elsewhere. So there is that I suppose mindset that needs to be had, that like this isn't just a like short-term test outcome where like, yes, you may like lose some revenue, like there is some risk involved, but like the potential upside of these big swing tests is huge. When you think about the like value or lifetime value that decision could bring to the business, it's pretty significant. And
Yep.
what I'd say is like, as leaders in marketing programs, you need to be empowering your teams to take those big swings and be willing to go to bat for them. There you go, dad joke. But that could be run up really clearly to say, yes, we are empowering you to make these decisions. We're empowering you to try some of these big swing tests, and I'm going to really advocate for you with the C-suite and like help you get this through. And I ultimately think like that's the really exciting stuff that we do as marketers, is those bigger swing tests. Sure, ACOB testing is fun, but like it's a different kind of fun. So that's where I think there's another like clear thing that leaders should be thinking through is, how do you empower your teams?
Well, that's certainly one of the other problems, right? Good marketing takes time.
Mm-hmm.
It does. And if you're going to try something new, you're going to go up the funnel, so to speak, or to try to reach a broader audience or test a new communication strategy. These types of things take time to show an effect in the business. Mm-hmm. And so that's where you get this friction, this sort of issue between the incentives and how marketing works, right? And so the incentives are like, hey, we need to hit a particular number this quarter, and we only have 40 days left in the quarter, or we have to hit a certain MQL number for the quarter. So we just need to maintain that level. And so if we're doing testing, we risk not hitting those particular numbers. But running these tests that, yes, they might not work, but they might also provide tons of long-term value. As you say, the LTV of some of these tests can be massive. Mm-hmm. They can have implications on, again, what I was saying before about protecting against disruptors coming into the industry. It can just unlock a whole pile of potential revenue or opportunity in the business. And so I think that is the problem that I see, is this friction between incentives, the short-term incentives, and of course the reality that marketing takes some time to actually show an effect in the business.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know then, how would you go about defining what a smart big swing might be? Because it is inherently risky, right? So like, what's the due diligence and planning, or what are the criteria that you use to plan a big swing? I think about the CMO that got fired last year because he did that big brand deal with Snoop Dogg, and it was like a barbecue company, and they just they took a swing that was too big and it did not work.
It comes back to fundamentals, right? So mapping out all of your assumptions about your marketing program, and so not just your media program, right? So how do consumers interact with your business? How, what is the customer journey that your consumers are going through, to research, understand the market, understand the solutions, choose a solution, all of those things. What are the assumptions that you have about your media program as well, of course? So, what is the effectiveness of search? What is the effectiveness of social media advertising, et cetera? Just mapping all of these things out can really help teams to develop this understanding of what they know and what they don't know, right? Because as you go through that process, you suddenly go, oh, actually, we don't know what the effectiveness is of these prospecting campaigns in Meta, because the platform is telling us that our return on ad spend is 50 cents on the dollar or something like that, we assume that there's additional value there, but we don't know what that value is. And so mapping out those assumptions just really helps to expose the gaps there. And, from there, and this is a very systematic way of approaching it, Phil might have a different way, but from there, you can really just outline, hey, what are the priority assumptions that we need to test, and kind of go from there. That will expose areas of opportunity. And then, of course, whether or not it's a big swing or not depends on how much you're changing and how much you think the potential outcome could be.
Yeah, I have very similar kind of like mindset, and I think it's easy to say think outside the box when it comes to thinking about a big swing, but like it's not easy thinking outside the box when you sometimes work within the confines of what you do on a day-to-day basis. It's difficult to look outside of that. So not to use the Silicon Valleyism of like first principles thinking, but like this is an apt kind of place to start thinking about that, is like start from scratch. Like, what is it that you're trying to achieve as a business, as a brand? How are you going to market now against that? And what is missing, or like what is not necessarily working for you at the moment that you can point to with some feeling at the start, maybe of like, hey, maybe we're not messaging our audience correctly, and we've got a great overall product, but like the customer's not able to link that product to ourselves as a brand. They think it could be any old brand within the marketplace. Like, that's a big problem. How can we try and unpack that as a big swing? So it's really starting to start from scratch, assume nothing at the start, and like build your assumptions, list those out over time, and really try to understand, well, where are those biggest opportunities? And one of the things I've seen in the past is there are always a lot of great ideas that come out of these processes, but there needs to be a clear and concise way to try and evaluate all of those opportunities. So rather than someone just thinking, well, this sounds great, like it looks really cool, is there a clear structure that we're using to evaluate each of those opportunities evenly, so that we can make a clear objective decision around what is the effort going to be to get this live, the confidence for it to work, and ultimately the impact it could have, like an ICE framework, if you will. And how could you try and evaluate all your options in that way to try and get refined down to what's going to be the most impactful thing we could do in the short term. I think I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll pass off, but I think the other thing I'd say is like having a clear, almost like document about whatever that idea is. So if you've got a big swing that you are proposing, it's less of a like one sentence, I need X budget for this test. There needs to be like a clear hypothesis. There needs to be reasoning and research behind why you're picking that specific big swing, a measurement plan, how much it's going to cost, potential upside, potential downside, caveats, assumptions, like list everything out so everyone throughout the company knows what's going on and what are the potential upsides and downsides, because people are going to be curious. And if you're laying all that out there before, it shows you've done your homework, and it's an important thought exercise for you to go through as the person presenting that big swing to start with. So kind of go in prepared, I think it would be the advice on that one, and really make sure that you've got a clear view of what you're trying to do before you even start trying to sell that up the food chain.
Yeah, I love that.
Something that I'm hearing a lot in this conversation, and I think it's a commonality that runs through a lot of these episodes, is there's an element of change management to trying to get any of these things through, right? Because you're getting, typically if you've got big swing budget, you have a big enough team that you have to convince a lot of people.
You have to convince a lot of people, and you have to, lay out your reasoning for doing the big swing in the first place. Otherwise, it's just a feeling, right? And there's a lot of marketing teams, I think, that operate based off of just feelings, and so I think there is absolutely an art to choosing these things, and sometimes it can just be intuition, and sometimes it can just be experience. But going through that process of laying everything out helps you to, at the very least, structure your thinking and think about angles that maybe you haven't thought about before, caveats, different ways of measuring the results, all of those things. And what I really push for whenever we're doing any kind of testing is, what are you going to do if it doesn't work. And I don't think that there's enough of that thinking that happens before there's a big test, before there's a big swing in this case, or any type of testing. It's just sort of like, hey, we want to find out what the result is going to be, but we haven't really thought about what we're going to do if it flops. And the reality with testing is that there's a lot of flops. There's a lot of times when it doesn't work. There's a lot of times when it's a disappointing result where it wasn't quite what you thought it was going to be. And so just thinking through those scenarios of, hey, what are we actually going to do in this case? Are we going to rerun this test? Or are we going to change our budget? Is this going to fundamentally change our understanding of how our media mix is functioning or performing? All of those things are great pieces to think through. The one question that I did have too, though, is just during that research process, I'm curious what your thought is on this, Phil, is I've always been of the mind that it's better to think about the customer first and not your competition. And so when it comes to big swings, I think that what a lot of marketing teams look at is like, oh, hey, our competitor is doing these big YouTube campaigns or something like that. And so we're going to test YouTube because they're doing it, right? And so I'm curious what your perspective is on where that fits in. From my perspective, it should be more customer centric. So it should be our customer hangs out on YouTube. Our customer needs the information that we can provide to them most effectively through a video format in the YouTube app or something along those lines. So making those statements about the strategy of your big swing or of your test, as opposed to, hey, other organizations in this market are doing it, so we're going to test it as well. I'm curious what you think about that.
You hit the nail on the head. Like, I think there's times and a place to use competitor research. Competitor research can be a powerful tool to try and understand how other brands are going to market and look at what might be working for them and what might not work for you. And also just like keep a pulse on what's going on with your competitor network. But when it comes to like research and thinking about big swings, you don't just want to follow what the market's doing, because like, is that really a big swing? Like the idea of a big swing is to try and like kind of like out position, if you will, like what the industry is doing, what your competitors are doing, and try something that's new and try something that's like big and can change the way you're going to market. So when I think about research, it's kind of what you were alluding to, Eric, like talk to your customers. Like, how are they interacting with your product? What do they like about your product? How are they consuming content around your product? Are they reading a bunch of reviews on Reddit before they buy your product and you're not advertising there? Maybe there's some really interesting thing that you could do in that space. So ultimately, the customers who are in engaging with your product and purchasing it are a great source of information. You can understand a lot about where you might find opportunities based upon what they're saying, but also find out about, well, what is it that you might not be doing that they want. And this goes beyond even like marketing big swings. Like if you find something throughout that research process around like, hey, there is this product feature that like people are really looking for, but we're not advertising it at all, but we have it in our product, that's a huge miss in terms of like how we're going to market. So it's that sort of research that I think can really back up, what you're trying to advocate for in this process, is to really try and understand, well, what is the customer doing out there on the internet browsing journey, or what are they actually doing when they're interacting with your product? That's a really great place to start in my mind.
That sort of sums up why I love marketing in the first place, right? Is that there's no map, right? There's no playbook that you can just follow that just like will tell you all of the steps that you have to do in order to make something successful, right? And this cuts to the heart of what we're talking about here, is that trying these new ideas, big ideas, ideally, is really how you push the marketing program forward. It's how you learn more about your market. It's how you improve your marketing program in general. It's how you win, right? And I think that, that's the beauty of marketing, is that it's, there is a lot of this research, but at the end of the day, you still have to say, this is what I believe is going to work based off of all of the information that I have. Now let's go try it, because there's no answer. There's no guarantee that it's going to work, but that's the beauty. And that's the I don't know, just the beauty of marketing. So
consider myself inspired, Eric. I'm ready to do some big swings now. But no, I completely agree. Like, it's a constant investigation, right? And I think when you stop investigating and you stop trying to find the next big thing, like that's when it's time to take pause and like really look at, well, what's stopping us from doing that? And as leaders in the space, I think it's important to recognize like when you hit that moment of like we're focusing on two small things, not the big thing that could try and change things. That's the moment to like look at why is that, and unpack and remove some of those roadblocks that might be in place. And some of those might be institutional and they might take some time to change, but like if the organization is tripping over itself, that's probably a big swing in and of itself to try and unpack like how could they get out their own way to test some of these things. And yeah, it's exciting to be a part of those changes.
That leads us to our next question, which I think we've already answered quite a bit, but let's summarize a little bit for our listeners. How can marketers start planning and budgeting for those strategic big swings? We know now why we should be doing them and why we're at risk if we don't, but how do we plan for them and how do we budget for them?
Yeah, I think in my mind, it's like a few things. One is like listing out all the big swings that you think you want to take, and do that through that kind of first principles thinking, if you will. Start from scratch. What are some of those big things? List them all out. Start evaluating them in a very standardized way. What's the impact going to be, the confidence and the effort behind each of those things? And then once you've picked one or two of those that you want to dive into a bit more, then start going through that process of what's that one pager, if you will, probably more than one page, but like what's the hypothesis, what's the clear reasoning and research behind it, the measurement plan, costs, upsides, downsides, caveats, assumptions. Like that would be when I'd start going really deep once I've selected those one or two big swings that you think may have legs. That would be my kind of like advice on how you'd start going about that. But also like try not to run lots of big swings side by side because often the big swings can like not be too easy to measure in my experience. So if you're running 2 or 3 at a time, they're going to start colliding. You're going to have a lot of resources that get kind of like bashed up against each other within the organization and just gets messy. So yeah, those would be some of the things that I'd kind of put out there.
The only thing I would add is befriend your CFO.
Yes.
just make sure that you're really clear on what the finance team needs from marketing, what the incentives are, if there are any opportunities to sort of educate them on how marketing works and what type of budget you need in order to test big ideas and these types of things. So I think having a really good relationship with the finance side of the business is really important, because then you just understand better how those marketing budgets are allocated and how you can justify carving out whatever you need in order to do that. Phil, to your point, yeah, don't go too big, I guess. If you're testing a bunch of different ideas and you need 50% of your marketing budget to do all the testing, that's too much, right? And so, I mean, there's going to be certain elements of your marketing program that are working at any given time. Make sure that you have the budget to double down on those. Then carve out some budget to be testing those big ideas into the future, because that's going to be what works for you next year.
So Eric's advice is to get dad's credit card.
Yeah. Take the CFO out for dinner.
Yeah.
But like time is a huge element in all of this, right? Like education to leadership around some of these things can take time. So I think there's almost a sweet spot that we need to find that's not being super reactive to a big swing and being like, yes, I'll write you a check tomorrow, without that leader asking kind of key questions about the program. That would make me nervous. I'd be like, let's make sure we all understand exactly what we're doing before we get into this. But understand that like, it's going to take some time to do it the right way, and like make sure that everyone is on board. So be patient, I think, in trying to get these things live, and don't rush it. Make sure it's done right versus just getting it out the door.
Perfect. So then this brings us to our final question, which is, what kind of big swings do you think marketers will be taking in 5 years? I'm asking you to put on your crystal balls, put crystal balls in front of you and tell me what are the big things that are going to be happening in 5 years from now.
I don't know what marketers are going to be doing in 5 years in terms of big swings. The industry is going to look really different, though, I think, based off of the forces of privacy and AI and those types of things. All I know for certain, though, is that the marketing teams that test those big ideas, take those big swings, and are always thinking about how do we drive long-term value out of this marketing program, those are the teams that are going to win. And the teams that just focus on small incremental changes, hey, how do we just tweak this ad copy just a little bit more to eke out just, half a percentage point or 1 percentage point, those teams, they're going to be disrupted. They're going to have a hard time having enough speed to keep up with how fast things are going to change from AI, how to measure those incremental changes and get clarity on the results of those incremental changes because of privacy changes. So the teams that are going to double down on those big ideas and make sure that they're a consistent part of their program, they're the ones that are going to win long term.
Nicely surmised, Eric. I don't know what else I'd add to that, aside from maybe putting an analogy out there of like marketing's always been a blend of like art and science. I think the industry's moved towards like the science part of it over the course of the past few years. But in the next 5 years, I think it's going to go back the other way to like the art of marketing is going to be a lot more prevalent within like growth marketing, if you will. So the teams who are really able to like get out that paintbrush and like really think bigger are going to be the ones who set themselves up for success. And those bigger swings that might be less comfortable for people who have been comfortable with a lot of data over the past 5 years, those are going to be the big swings that are going to be happening. Digital out of home, CTV, not highly trackable, but those are some like tangible things that we're even seeing now people are doing to try and get themselves out there and move outside the box from a Google and Meta standpoint. So yeah, I think it's going to be a very different industry in 5 years, and those artists are going to be the ones I think who are going to be winning at that point.
I actually want to build on what you said quickly, because this is something that I'm observing in the content marketing space that I think is going to be relevant to everyone, which is we have relied on SEO for too long and it's made us make bad content. And now as AI is coming in more, we're actually going to start to see some like degeneration of SEO and its value. And if you haven't been making content for your customers, all the hard work you put into that is going to be just down the drain. And so I think like what I can say now and in 5 years is that if you were prioritizing what your customers want from you, where they want it, how they want to hear it, even if the medium changes, you have something that you can turn into something else. I think the people that are still working to the medium and not for the customer are going to be in danger.
+1.
Yeah, stop writing your blog posts with ChatGPT. That's definitely one. I mean, I was sort of holding myself back here, Santana, in terms of the content marketing stuff and how AI is changing it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that stuff is a race to the bottom, right? It's, if ChatGPT can give you or can write you an article, it can write anyone an article. And so what value does it have for your customers? Why are you putting that out there just to I guess, continue to try to push that SEO engine that was relevant 10 years ago, right? It's not relevant today. You have to be thinking about new ways of approaching that whole thing. I'm no SEO expert, but
it's big swings everywhere, right? Like the worse your competitors are, or the more they're all doing the same stuff, that's a bigger opportunity for you to come in with your big swing.
Yep.
And what's interesting to me is if you think about a lot of these campaigns within Google and potentially Meta over the long term becoming more just homogenous and saying like, hey, Google, here is $10,000 a day. Here's my website. Go figure it out. Like that is a real thing. Like dynamic search campaigns exist now that do exactly that. So when you think about the content side of things, are you going to start having to optimize your website for paid content, if you will, and like actually have your website trying to optimize around how do I try and attract the right sorts of users via paid by optimizing the website from an SEO perspective, which is kind of like pretty wacky and out there, but like it's generally something that in 5 years might be more of a thing. Maybe there aren't keywords anymore, and we are just optimizing landing pages or websites as the keywords for our search campaigns, which is again like very different. I don't know if that'll be a thing, but again, thinking about the big swings, like maybe there's a whole kind of website replatforming that needs to happen as a result of that. That's going to really help get content in the right places and make sure that product pages are rich with content outside of just product information. Who knows? But those sorts of things will be, big as far as the big changes that we've got coming to the industry.
Totally. I think we could fall down this rabbit hole forever, but we'll end it there. I've counted only 3 baseball metaphors.
Oh, that's good.
Maybe I've miscounted, but I think only 3. So I'll add a little ticker at the end here.
Nice.
Thanks so much, friends. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. This has been The Hypothesis. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes or to get in touch, find us at thehypothesisshow.com or at Thrive Digital, both linked for you in our description box. And if you liked today's episode, we'd love if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks.